we must recognize that the target of the missionaries is not overtly the Indian state. It may be covertly the Indian state, but overtly their target is the Hindu civilization. And so the responsibility, I think, falls on the Hindu civilization to appeal to the Indian state and demand that their rights under international law and under the United Nations charters on the rights of indigenous people are respected. You will recall the Bamiyan Buddhas, where the Islamists, the ISIS terrorists, destroyed those ancient artifacts.
Yes.
And the purpose of it is to destroy a connection of a people with their history, with their ancestral civilization. What conversion actually is, it's a similar act of violence, except it's on the intellectual and it's on the emotional space.
Jai Shri Krishna, Namaste, and welcome to Citti Media's Current Affairs Show. Today we'll be discussing the recent conference of Forbes. Those of you may have seen a couple of our videos regarding our concerns of Forbes. We have to discuss matters even further with that today. And to talk about that, I have our esteemed Panditji, Pandit Satish Sharma. Panditji, welcome.
Pranam ji, namaskar, Jai Shri Ram to you, Saloni ji. Thank you for raising this subject. It's timely. The deeper we begin to understand what happened at the Freedom of Religion and Belief Conference, the more concerns, I think, come to light. So I'm happy to explore those. And if we can, let's bring it into a current context as well, because I think there are developments on the interfaith front happening almost every day now.
Yes, Panditji, I read today that the Pope himself has actually arrived in Canada because the indigenous Canadians first received an apology in 1993, I believe it was, for the ethnocide and genocide of their heritage, of the indigenous heritage. And correct me, but I believe the Pope is actually going there to apologize again.
Yes, the Pope, I think he lands today or he landed yesterday, depending upon where your time zone is. And it is openly accepted. It has been announced that he's there to deliver an apology on behalf of the Catholic Church, Catholic Christianity, for many things. Most notably, it's to apologize for what was done to the children of the native indigenous tribes and what was done in the name of the church by people who were Christians. And in fact, by people who were doing what they were doing with the official and unofficial blessing of the Roman Catholic Church. Our viewers may have remembered the papal bull, the fatwa that Christians issue, whereby they created the doctrine of discovery, which meant that if you went to any place and there were indigenous people there, if they weren't Christians, you basically could enslave them. You could steal their lands, you could do whatever you wished, you could in effect treat them as though they were livestock. And in many countries, even as recently as 1961, indigenous natives around the world were being treated as livestock by members of the Christian churches with the blessings of the churches. So the Pope has arrived there. As you say, in 1993, there was the first apology, and that was from the Anglican Christian tradition. There were lots of promises made, all sorts of gestures that were made, many atmospheric, shall we say, gestures were made. There was a lot of embracing, a lot of pious hand rubbing, a lot of virtue signaling. And even in 1993, the indigenous natives, I've almost said, they call them Indians. You know, this is how fixated they were with our Indians at that time. Even in 1993, the natives, the Inuit, the Metis, they all objected. They said, words is great, but we need to see something more substantial. We're now almost 30 years later, 29 years later, and only, I think it was last month even, Justin Welby, the head of the Anglican Christian family, he went and apologized in person, and now the Pope has decided to apologize. But the sentiment is, and it's being articulated as this quite strongly, that words are no longer good enough. I'm trying to get a copy of the video recordings of those events, and we'll get one of the Pope's apology as well, and we'll put them together and let's see what they're actually saying. I'm reminded that an apology, it basically costs nothing. And unless you're going to accompany an expression of remorse with some sort of expression of restitution, of trying to repair the harm that you did, then it's merely atmospheric in its words. And a lot of the natives are now saying, we've been waiting for a long time for this. It's not enough. And I suspect the real reason the Pope has gone there is to try and mollify this increasing sentiment that Christians are actually not doing anything, that the church is not actually doing anything. And each and every year goes by, and there are native indigenous members of those communities who are dying. The living record is disappearing. There are many who are committing suicide. Alcoholism is rife. And all of these have stemmed out of the trauma that was inflicted on families by having their children taken away from them. Many were killed, many were abused, and many survivors to this day are still traumatized. So there is a lot happening at this moment in time, and a lot of apologies are going to sort of come.
It's interesting because in India, we still have a lot of missionaries doing similar work. And as you say, an apology costs nothing. When would India even get the verbal apology, do you think? Is it foreseeable? What with the missionaries still being there converting?
This is inevitable. It's going to happen. As India struggles to get up from its knees, it was crushed. Its identity, its self-awareness was driven into the dust. And what's happening now is that national and civilizational identity is slowly dusting itself down and learning to stand from being literally on its knees. And as it dusts itself down, it starts to revisit its own history. It starts to revisit what was done to it. And in that process, it's now beginning to find the vocabulary. It's beginning to find the words with which to organize its thinking. And what it's going to say is it's going to say, this was done to us, in the same way that the indigenous people of Australia, the indigenous people of Canada, the indigenous people of Africa, the indigenous people of the Americas are all beginning to find their voice in the English language. Bharat is also finding its voice. I'm proud to say that we're a part of that process. And when Bharat also acquires the vocabulary to be able to articulate clearly, this is what was done to us. This is the process that has to be followed so that we can heal from the trauma that you inflicted upon us. That's when all of a sudden we will get a flurry of apologies. You may recall that Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, he went to Jallianwala Bagh,
Yes.
where effectively a Christian commander in the military, the British Indian Army, he shot and ordered the massacre, the slaughter of unarmed civilians.
Yes.
And that has never been formally apologized or acknowledged by a government. There are lots of regrets that have been extended, but you see, an apology is an acknowledgement of responsibility,
Yes.
whereas an expression of regret, it doesn't carry that same weight. And so nobody in that scenario has offered a genuine apology. We hope it will be coming. But you're absolutely right. Bharat has this journey to go along as well. And that journey is underway, it is started, and it's inevitable. We will see in a time in the near future a pope. We will see the appearance of the archbishops in their remorseful mode more and more. And I'm confident that the Pope will also visit India and apologize at some stage.
Yes, no, absolutely. And it's wonderful having apologies. And as I say, India is still overdue an apology. Christians have a habit of going to confession, doing a sin, going to confession. Will this just be another confession rather, and a few Hail Marys and make themselves feel better?
I wouldn't be at all surprised. History would seem to suggest that that's the process that's adopted. And call me cynical, but on the basis of evidence and history, there has been very little reparation. If you look at the horrific abuses of children in Ireland,
Yes.
that's only now being spoken about. If you look at the same phenomenon across the globe, it's only now being spoken about.
Yeah.
And so it would be wonderful if they even applied their own processes so that there would be an expression of remorse. There would then be a confession. There would then be an apology. there would then be some sort of penance. And then after the penance has been completed, there is a process of atonement. The word atonement is actually at one ment. It means we are now again at one. So something has been done to create a rift between two parties. And after that process, especially concluding in atonement, the two parties become at one again. And that process is not something that the churches nor the Christian missionaries have followed with regard to what was done in the colonies across the globe. And it's a process that really needs to be brought to their attention. The Christian evangelical movement, it needs to confess the sins of its members.
Yes.
It needs to then do penance, and then it needs to, at the end of it, look forward to atonement. But this must be done as is, shall we say, as is required, as is dictated, as is demanded by the victims, not by the perpetrators of the crimes.
Of course.
That's also a problem. So let's see how this process unfolds in front of us. It's the beginning of the process, and it needs to progress rapidly.
Yes. Is there anything India could do to accelerate the process and to get that long overdue apology? Like they've targeted some NGOs that were against and anti-India. What could they do about these missionaries that are still there?
We must recognize that the target of the missionaries is not overtly the Indian state. It may be covertly the Indian state, but overtly their target is the Hindu civilization. And so the responsibility, I think, falls on the Hindu civilization to appeal to the Indian state and demand that their rights under international law and under the United Nations charters on the rights of indigenous people are respected. So I think the impetus has to come from the Hindu community, not just in Bharat, but the diaspora community as well.
Yeah.
And I think once that voice starts to clearly articulate what its position is and what it needs and what it demands, then I think we will move to a situation where an apology will become closer to reality. But there is work to be done, and that work really will begin with the Hindu voice saying, hold on a moment, this is not good enough. You see, Saloniji, there is a process which is now becoming very clear and visible. The process is used by missionaries, and we are seeing it played out in front of us. Stage one of the process is exactly what Fiona Bruce MP and the Christian missionaries in the Freedom of Religion and Belief Conference were presenting to the world, which is that the world is in a terrible state. We are not responsible, is their position, for what the state of the world is, even though they are directly as a result of colonialism. So the first process, the first step, is the white savior mood.
Yes.
And then it's virtue signaling that the world is terrible. We have the solution to the problems of the world. Allow us to have unfettered access to be able to teach what we want to teach. And that's the process as it begins. Where it concludes is also being played out in front of us, and that is the apology for the erasure of indigenous civilizations. But I have seen that that apology only comes when the indigenous civilization is virtually on its knees, when its internal structures have been so weakened that the likelihood of it collapsing inwards, that likelihood is so great that then an apology seems to come very, very quickly and rapidly. And the last thing I've noticed in all of these apologies is not a single apology says that we wish to have friendship outside of Christ. They always say, we've done terrible things, we betrayed this, we didn't do that, we treated you in this manner, and we look forward to us being again a family within Christ. So it's that same umbrella. You know, it's not saying that we came into your houses and your homes, we stole your children, or we killed them. So actually, our philosophy, our home, our family is guilty. And we want to withdraw from interfering in your lives, interfering in your practices. That's not what they're saying.
No.
What they're saying, we want to continue with much the same and absorb you into our family, now having weakened you to such a degree that your capacity to resist our assimilation is so weak. And so there is a disingenuity about the whole process. And this, I think, the indigenous civilizations are seeing quite clearly now.
Yes, it does seem like a lot of Hindus are finally waking up. And when an apology does come, because inevitably it does need to come at some point in the near future now, won't it be too little too late? Because people have already converted, and conversion is more than a ritualistic process. It's a form of brainwashing. So people actually believe that they have converted for the good.
Slonaji, you will recall the Bamiyan Buddhas, where the Islamists, the ISIS terrorists, destroyed those ancient artifacts.
Yes,
And the task, the purpose of it is to destroy a connection of a people with their history, with
yes,
their ancestral civilization. What conversion actually is, it's a similar act of violence, except it's on the intellectual and it's on the emotional space.
yes,
But it severs an individual from their ancestral roots, from their language, from their history, from all of the achievements of their forefathers. Suddenly they are destroyed. So it is no less an act of violence. And we will see a time, and I can see this happening around us, even our conversation, as I say, is a part of it. We will see a time when the vocabulary becomes so clear that we can articulate that this is what's being done to us. And we will articulate it in such a clear manner that those who are doing it, they will have a dharam sankat. They will be required to reflect upon, one, what their ancestors did, two, whether it was justified, how can it have been divinely sanctioned, and what are they doing about it now to prevent it and prevent it from ongoing. And so all of these are situations that are going to arise in front of us. You know, it's becoming so clear that this process of colonization, it's shifted gear from being overt and physical to becoming devious, covert, and but equally corrosive. And the process is, as I've said, it's very simple. First, you have FORB, which is we are touting freedom of religion and belief. And as a powerful, toxic majority, they have the capacity to inflict that upon many, many nations.
yes,
Well, William Wilberforce was the first example in 1813. It was to save the Hindus that the Church of England found its way into Bharat. And we've seen what they've done. They've done exactly in Bharat what they have done in Canada, for which apologies are now being given.
yes,
So the first is this freedom of religion and belief. The next is ethnocide, which you have just described, and I've just given an example of the Bamiyan Buddhas. Following that is all of the terrible things associated with colonization. That is the third step. It is seizure of assets, it's seizure of social capital, it's the acquisition of human networks and all of the assets that are contained within those human networks. It is colonialism and the same sort of grasping. And then the final step is that mealy-mouthed, hand-rubbing, pious apology. So we can see what it is now. More and more people are seeing it. And I'm given a great deal of confidence by the fact that even the populations of the Euro-Christian West, who weren't aware this was being done in their names by institutions supposedly representing them, even those populations are beginning to see this and are
yes,
beginning to reject it. So these institutions, I think, are being squeezed from both sides. History is squeezing them. The revelation of their past atrocities is causing a great deal of pressure. And the future, which is the world knowing exactly how they do what they do, and the pernicious motives, the underhanded, devious motives behind why they do what they do, is also exerting pressure. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful development. Let's gently encourage these developments to come to fruition and bear wonderful fruit for all of us.
yes, no, absolutely. I guess we just have to watch the space, see how the Pope words his apology, what is the content of that apology, and if we can then get them to apologize to India and remove the missionaries that are there, and may we move forward now from this, because this history has been barbaric and we're suffering the consequences to this very day from all of these conversions. Thank
You're
you.
absolutely right. Just in conclusion, the quality of their product is something that they're always sort of distancing themselves from. It was humans who failed, not the product itself. The brand Jesus, is something they always protect. And you've mentioned the Pope's speech. Let's observe exactly the nature of the apology. And I think we will see it will be an attempt to protect brand Jesus and an attempt to isolate the ideology which has caused these terrible human tragedies across the globe, it will be an attempt to distance that from the church. You know, we are an imperfect church. We have a wonderful teacher. He guides us, but we're so imperfect. And one day we will get it right. And when we get it right, the world will be a happy place, kumbaya. But that's what's being peddled, and I don't think people are buying it anymore.
No. Panditji, thank you so much for this conversation. It was very insightful. Thank you very much. And I look forward to
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Jai Shri Ram.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net.